Hi, everyone. It's Monday, September 18th, 2017 at 1 o'clock Eastern Time, and this is Admissions Live. I'm your host, Erin Sapinka. On today's live broadcast, we're taking a look at new insights from admitted students, thanks to data from Eduventures survey of admitted students. You'll want to keep an eye out for it later this fall. Admissions Live is part of the Higher Ed Live network. Our episodes offer you direct access to the best and brightest minds in education. Be part of our live broadcast by sharing your knowledge. Participate in today's discussion by tweeting us using hashtag HigherEdLive. Higher Ed Live is brought to you by NRCCUA, a membership organization focused on supporting better enrollment outcomes for students in schools. At the recent NACAC conference, NRCCUA introduced Encora, its vision for supporting data-driven enrollment decisions. NRCCUA members gain access to the Encora Data Lab, a platform that empowers enrollment professionals with data science, predictive analytics and research, and omni-channel enrollment services right at their fingertips. Learn more and sign up at NRCCUA membership at Encora.org. All of Higher Ed Live episodes are free and easy to access in the video archives at higheredlive.com. Or you can take Higher Ed Live with you on the road by subscribing to the podcast. Higher Ed Live is produced by M. Stoner, a digital-first agency committed to tailored solutions that drive real results. We want Higher Ed Live to become your go-to professional development resource. To improve the quality and delivery of our content, help us by filling out the survey at the link we'll be tweeting shortly. So now I'm excited to dive right into our show. To preface a little bit, I love admissions. No matter where I go in higher ed, education, and my career, admissions will always hold a special place in my heart. Prospective admitted students are some of my favorite audiences to work with, not only because they're so exciting and refreshing every year, but they're constantly challenging me to be a better communicator and a better marketer because they are changing so much. I'm also a huge data nerd, and so you can definitely say I'm extremely excited to welcome our guest to today's show, Kim Reed. Kim brings a wealth of knowledge from over 20 years, oh, my screen just disappeared on me. I love when that happens. Brings a wealth of advanced analytics capability in market research, assessment, and program evaluation to her work, and combines evidence and expertise to help clients make strategic decisions that shape the future of their institution. She has over 20 years of experience in research and consulting in education. Most recently, Kim served as Vice President of Research Operations at McGuire Associates, a research-based consulting firm focused on enrollment management, where she created new lines of business and brand analytics specific to higher education, pricing and value, and strategic academic program management. Kim, welcome to the show. I'm really excited to have you here, and thank you for joining me.
Great, thank you. It's great to be here. I'd love to talk about these conversations as well. Try to figure out what's all going on in the minds of these 18-year-olds. So thanks for having me.
It keeps us young, I think. I mean, I'm always in tune, and I always hope that I'll never be someone that just feels so disconnected because I'll just be staying in touch with them.
Yes.
Before we jump into my questions, I do want to remind our viewers that they can pick Kim's brain. Don't let me have all the fun by myself. If you've got a question for Kim or want to share your own insights, head to Twitter and join the conversation again by using the hashtag HigherEdLive. We're looking forward to hearing from you, and towards the end of our conversation, I'll be able to slip some of the questions in. So before we get into some of the data points and the information that the survey found, Kim, I'd like to get a little background on the survey for some of our viewers who may not be familiar with it. Can you walk me through a little bit of the history?
Yeah, sure. Well, it's our survey of admitted students is something we've been doing a long time at Eduventures, at least since 2007, way back when. And what's exciting about it is with our partnership with NRCCUA, our parent company, we've been able to really expand the reach of our survey. So it is what what people usually think of when you think of an admitted student survey. We are surveying students who have been admitted to all kinds of institutions across the country, and we're really trying to pick their brains about what they cared about in their decision, how they made their decision, what were financial factors, what were factors related to communications and service from the schools they're working with. This year, what's been really different is we are aggregating a couple of different sources of data. We work with individual institutions, so they provide us their admitted student lists, and then we're able to give very specific information back about those admitted students. But because we're able to survey the entire senior group of My College Option students from NRCCUA, we were able to generate a survey sample of more than 90,000 students nationally, which we did our back of the envelope math. We think that's about 8% of all of the first-time freshmen who are applying to colleges directly out of college. So it's a great data resource, lots of information in it. either at a specific institutional level, but also certainly at a national level.
That just made me so excited. That's a lot of data.
It is
a lot of that's. I'm also impressed that you got 90,000. Like, that's so many college prospective students, and having worked with this audience regularly, like, congratulations on getting so many.
Yeah, but I think it goes back to what you're saying is I actually think that students, as they go through this process, they're getting to the end of what they see as a long road to through the next gate of their life, and they're very, very reflective about what the process has been like. So they're actually pretty engaged in responding to these surveys.
I've definitely noticed that with the generations that I've been working with and each new class, how many are interested in immediately getting involved in the admissions process for future classes, whether it's, I think our incoming class actually put together a feedback form that they collected through a Google survey, and was working on a way to get whether it was a report or just some contextual information to share with our admissions office. And I was just so impressed that at 18, 17 years old, that they're thinking about next year's class and how this process could be made easier or more informative or better for the future students.
Yeah, they're very thoughtful.
It is very true. So coming off of NACAC and the 2017 conference, I was wondering, what were some of the big trends and data points that you've been seeing pop up at the conference and in this data set and just around the space contextually?
Oh, sure, absolutely. I mean, I think NACAC's always an amazing conference to go through just for the sheer volume of people who are there and everything that's going on. And I always think of it as a conference where a lot of enrollment professionals, certainly on the college side, but also on the high school side as well, are really trying to build and maintain relationships. And they're really looking, first of all, to go understand those tried and true relationships, make sure that those long-standing important relationships continue to go, but they're also very much forward-looking. So, looking around to figure out what are the new ways that we can engage our students, our families, our high schools that we work with. To that end, I really think a few things that I continue to see grow over the last few years is certainly the idea of learning how to personalize recruiting and communications to the greatest degree that you can. Right. So that's really then thinking about how do we understand our students? How do we understand the different segments of our students in a deep way? And then what kind of technology is available to help us really find these best fit students for our institution? How can we put this data into the hands of every recruiter, every marketer that gives them insight into the students they're working with, the territories they're working with, the specific messaging and content they need to get out there to help those students decide as best they can. Kind of a data to the edge strategy.
Yeah, and
about that. And sorry, the second thing is I still think also, obviously there's a tremendous amount of interest on figuring out what's the best strategic use of social media in college recruiting.
Absolutely. Again, every day you see tying it with social media a little bit, this kind of migration from these platforms of where they're putting all this information out there a little bit more openly, a little bit more loosely, and as they're realizing that the internet is basically an archive of everything that they've ever done, you see them migrating towards more personal opportunities to engage with us and each other. And so one of the phenomenons that I've been seeing in the different class groups that I work with directly is the group me. And so something that's really challenging to us is communicating with these students and getting them in a space that we can share information quickly and efficiently, while also kind of seeing how they interact with one another. They're moving off of this to a very peer-to-peer location. And while I think social has that wide reach, there's still a really awesome opportunity for you to have a personalized touch, even though it's a part of everyone's toolkit anymore.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
What were some of the biggest takeaways from this year's survey, in your opinion, so far?
Yeah,
I know you're still working on it.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. It's a work in progress. So as you articulated earlier, I'm kind of deep in the data in the last few days and working on building out a report for our Eduventures members. What always strikes me about these admitted student surveys is they don't change vastly year over year. Very incrementally, you see shifts happen. But every time I look into the data, I'm more and more reminded that intelligent segmentation of the data is what matters the most, right? If you think about it, we still see the same big influences on choice. You know, the top things that students care about when they make their choice are what's the quality of the core academics of any of the institutions they're looking at, and is it affordable? And, you know, on average, students care about those things in equal measure. And there's a secondary set of things that they always care about, right? What's the academic environment? How is career preparation rolling into these things? But what you really seem to understand as soon as you start to kind of peel back the layers of the onion in the data is you see that it matters which segment of students you're looking at, and that the variety of things that they care about changes pretty drastically when you parse things by student academic major or by the student mindsets that we've developed in our prospective student survey as well. So slight changes, but really important to get down and tease that apart.
I think so. I like this direction of intelligent segmentation. And so, what are some ways that you're seeing, or a good example of what admissions offices or even high school counselors trying to direct their students in the right places? What's a real life example of that intelligent segmentation and how we can start applying it in our day-to-day?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll talk about two kinds of segmentation. So there's the kind of segmentation that admissions officers have been doing since time immemorial, right? So they know very well how to segment by academic major. That's probably the most critical segmentation, since most students really come into college search through the lens of an academic major. So thinking about students as engineers versus education majors versus biology majors versus, you know, communications majors, that's critical. That really gives you useful, actionable information to where you can work with individual academic departments and faculty and people who are reaching out and providing materials through that lens of academic major. An example of how to take that to the next level then is to use something like our behavioral and attitudinal market segments, right? So this is harking back a little bit to our prospective student survey, but we divided the market into 6 ways of thinking, 6 mindsets, and I won't go over them here, but we can follow them through. You know, we can follow a group of nearly 7,000 students from our prospective students through to this admitted student survey, and we can see is the way, you know, there's a way that students think about their upcoming college education. There's kind of a dream that they have for their college education. Are they really focused on graduate school and that's their path through college? Are they career pragmatists who just want to get a job in a highly affordable manner? Are they exploration and meaning students who are really looking for broad, wide open experiences? That gets to that point I was making earlier about recruiting, because if you know a couple of things about students, you know what their academic major is, you know where they live, you know what their GPA is, but then you also know more specifically for an individual, how do they think and feel about college? You can really begin to drive home very personalized messages. So I think it's important for institutions to bring together those two kinds of segmentation. You know, this more straightforward demographic segmentation that's really critical to you building your classes, but also thinking about who students are at an individual level as much as possible.
Well, I think for me, it takes it back to some of my earlier days in the admissions office, where you had people that were concerned about sharing snowy photos of campus because they were afraid
Right.
the snow would scare people away. Well,
Yeah.
someone who, while I now live in New Hampshire, someone who doesn't do well in snow, I like to be fully aware of the snow and hope that my college or the choices that I'm looking at would be upfront about the climate, because if I get there and everything is best fit, but this very important environment element doesn't fit, that, in my experience when I was looking as a student, was enough to deter me from some locations. And retention rates and back to the point of best fits, these intelligent audience segments, I think, are really eye-opening to us, and realizing that yes, you do want to showcase that you do get snow in the winter, and that snow sometimes falls in spring finals, and otherwise you'll have students who come and are not expecting that.
Yeah, I mean, an example of this is if you look at these social focus students, for example, these kids who think about at college as a great time to meet lots of people, to get involved in all kinds of activities, and what they want to get out of their college experience is a great job, but also these lasting friendships. Those types of students, when you look at how they behave at the yield stage, they're looking for different pieces of information to push them over the top. You know, the piece of information that's going to put them over top is an opportunity to learn about the personality characteristics of students on campus, right? Now compare that to someone who's in that career pragmatist bucket. Those students are going to need to know much, much more about affordability, and it's something they're going to discuss deeply with their family. So you're going to have different yield strategies with those different kinds of students. You have to know who they are, how they're thinking about the choice, what their concerns are going into their choice, and then you have to be able to get them the right information to have those final discussions to make that decision.
Again, we circle back to the idea that our audiences are increasingly thoughtful, and I think that's something that we are thankfully moving closer and closer to, is understanding that these 17 and 18-year-olds are some of the brightest minds in the business, and we're trying to recruit them. And so not only are we looking at the things that they care about, but also remembering to not treat them like they won't figure it out on their own, or end up like, oh, it never snows in Hanover, New Hampshire. No, that would be wrong, and we should never say that. But
yeah, and I think about it. I mean, if you have to be honest about this, is for those of us who are older, and I'm probably the oldest one here on the phone right now, or in the hangout right now, these students today are much more sophisticated about college search than we ever were. They're looking at more colleges and more factors and a much more complex environment than any other students before. So they do have a level of sophistication and about the decision. They can be jaded about some parts of it, but they're pretty knowledgeable. And by the time they get down to that final decision in May or June, they really have absorbed a lot of information.
Absolutely. And again, they're such a resource of knowledge of the process because they've done it at all these schools. I'm not applying to 6 schools every year just to see how it works. We don't have that access. So let's talk a little bit about surprises. What were some of the hidden gems or nuggets that the survey has kind of revealed so far?
Yeah, I think the biggest one that it's revealed thus far is one of the new questions we asked this year based on some feedback from our clients was trying to get a sense of how confident students were about the majors that they're selecting. And what's interesting is there's a real difference in the level of confidence students have about whether, how good a fit that major is for them, depending on different academic areas, right? So perhaps when you think through it, it's not as surprising, but students who are really going into what I would call articulated majors. And what I mean by that is majors that are strongly connected to very specific professions. So those would be majors like education or health professions or criminal justice, and even visual and performing arts. Even students who say, I know I'm going to be an artist, they're very confident about their choice of major. They're going to do it. But the more traditional academic majors, the ones that aren't connected directly to a very specific career, like any STEM majors, behavioral and social science, humanities, even business, these students are less confident. And I think that just goes back to this reinforcing idea of the overall anxiety about the value of education and ensuring that you're making a good choice at this point in time that's going to result in you getting that job and the ability to pay back your student loans. So again, I just think that, again, as we think about recruiting through academic majors, that's something you take into consideration. Just because someone is raising their hand and saying, I want to be an engineer, they're not, that's about 55% of engineers are certain that they want to be an engineer. There's a whole bunch who are unsure about that choice.
Definitely. Having gone through the process with my little brother a few years back, where he ultimately decided that a typical higher education experience was not the right fit for him. And I think that had we not been so thoughtful about it, he could have ended up at a typical 4-year school and realized that, wow, this really wasn't the right direction for me. And so I think, again, back to being this generation and these incoming students are just so thoughtful about the process. And when we're thoughtful in return, I really liked the career articulation and the breakdown of that intelligence segment. I think that's a really unique piece of information. For schools where you come in kind of with an application, you put down on a piece of paper, this is what I'm interested in studying. How do you think that is kind of almost not negative, but kind of hurts people when they have to figure out and fit into a box of, oh, I think I'm going to be a journalism major, or, oh, I want to study engineering, but really I like writing, I like computers. I'm not sure what fits me best.
Yeah, I think that's one of the most confusing things there is for these kids today is they understand the weight of their decision. and they understand the importance of trying to find a good fit academic major. But I think that then they can go overboard in that regard, right? So for example, take engineering. I think it's a very interesting field because obviously the job opportunities are pretty good in engineering. But is that forcing students who maybe aren't natural engineers into choosing majors they might not be successful at, right? So I think that what that means for institutions is that they need to really help students in every major understand and to explore their career options very early on as they enroll. And they're also going to have to pay attention in the student experience through advising their academic advisors, their career advisors, to pay attention to how well that student is making that match and making that fit. And they're going to have strategies upon enrollment then for helping students who might be having questions about their major to feel that that's not a bad thing to do. You know, there's nothing wrong with reevaluating a choice, and that if you do that, there are also great opportunities to do that within your institution. And it's all about, you know, alleviating students' anxieties and providing them the right pathways to get to a level of success. And that, you know, we all know this, we've all been through this in our lives, is that you usually don't end up where you thought you were going to end up. You just need to make sure you have all the support you can to follow the track to somewhere good for you.
And I think naturally when you think of support, family, mentors, counselors, teachers, but again, the admissions office and the admissions officers that are working with these students and going out on travel could be a very key support system. And again, back to that personalization, the one-on-one, I feel like someone is talking to me versus a group of students or an auditorium full of people interested.
Yeah, and I think that's important. One of the, you know, so you can look at our admitted student survey and you can say, well, this is great for helping our admissions office rethink recruitment strategies and yield strategies, which it certainly is. But it's also important information to share more deeply in your institution, you know, to help make that transition and help folks in academic departments and in student affairs really understand where they're starting with students, and to think about this kind of negotiated pathway that you're always on with students to help them be successful.
Yeah, and jumping a little bit ahead to a question, I'll go back in a few minutes. Which you touched on it just briefly, but the survey, one thing it kind of digs into is the anxieties surrounding the student experience. And I would love to break that down a little bit more. How does the survey explore when it comes to those types of anxieties? And you mentioned briefly there, but what are some other ways that we can apply this information about the anxieties our students are experiencing?
Yeah, I think in last year's survey, we did talk about anxieties around the student experience. This year, we talked a little bit more about our anxieties related to the actual applying to colleges, right? And so what is it that's, you know, who's stressed out and what is it that's stressing people out? What's interesting, again, is that there are, when you look again at those articulated majors, those people are less stressed out, right? So they feel like they're making a concrete decision. They might have had some experiences while they were in high school, internships, other work they've done that make them feel pretty good about their choice. So they're feeling that the choice is less stressful. Again, like for example, STEM majors are very stressed out about, and relatively speaking, about their decisions. And what's most stressful? It's the usual things. Certainly financial aid and being able to afford college is the most stressful thing in college search. But also there's a lot of just about the admissions process, making all your deadlines and time management. And, you know, with the Common App and the potential of the Coalition App and other ways of applying, it's actually a very complex application environment out there. And then the third thing is really then just finding the right fit schools. So those are still, you know, getting students through this process a little bit more easily is important. But there are then, when you get underneath the hood of those things that are just stressful to everybody, there are some things that then, like, so for example, socially focused students who are, you know, looking forward to that aspect of college, they're much more stressed out about standardized testing. Career pragmatists are much more stressed out about being academically prepared for their college experience. So I think also those are some things that your admissions team should recognize as they're working with students, that they have different pressures in terms of what they're trying to do in the application process.
And kind of leading again into that, we have a question from Twitter, Will Patch, who's really enjoying your talking of the personas work and what Eduventures is up to regarding developing these intelligence segments surrounding these thought processes of applying students. Is there any vision of how to track these personas through to graduation, continuing kind of the understanding how it evolves over the course of 4 years? Because I can really see that data being useful as you're working with future newer people into that cycle and moving them through.
Yeah, these are ideas we're testing right now. They're not available at the moment, but one thing, because we had this 90,000 sample survey sample from the My College Options database, we believe it's possible for us to project mindsets onto the entire database. So any student in our 5 million strong database can be given a probability that they belong to a certain mindset. And if that's the case, then if you're tracking those students through your admissions funnel, then you ought to be able to look and see how do students retain differently, do students in different majors do differently. So I think that is something we really want to do. We're not quite there yet. We'll be a little bit down the road later this year, and stay tuned 6 months from now. We'll see what we've got going on. But I think that the viewpoint expressed in that Twitter question is exactly kind of the best use of this data. You really want to get through the full life cycle to understand how these personas do, but also how the personas evolve. Because certainly once you get, these personas are about snapshots of 17 and 18-year-olds. As you know, by the time you get through your college education, your viewpoints change pretty significantly about what's been important and what is important as well.
Absolutely. I think that's a awesome, again, data nerd, so I'm super excited to see how, and also it's an interesting standpoint because you're applying data to thoughts and personalities and a little bit more of the softer sciences versus this person applied to be a math major and stayed a math major through 4 years. And did these things and completed it in the expected amount of time. So that's very interesting to me. And I do want to remind our viewers that please feel free to tweet us questions using hashtag HigherEdLive. We're taking questions from there as we go along. And so we touched on it a little bit about how certain things like affordability and sense of place and best fit are really ranking high for these prospective students. But what are some of the other things that have held true for these audiences over the course of this year's survey and previous surveys since 2007?
Yeah, I think one of the things, the constant that always holds true, is that financial aid really does play a big part in this picture. So whenever you look at an admitted student survey, you've kind of got two sides of the story you're trying to tell. You're trying to tell a story that says, what could we have done differently in marketing and recruiting, in terms of the messaging side, how could we have done a better job with that? And then the other side of the story is, how could we have done a better job just on the side of, did we provide enough financial incentive for these students to come? So in our survey, on the national average, we still see that 72% of all students say that financial aid had an influence on their decision. Might not have been a final factor, but it's certainly something that held sway. So I think it's critical for institutions to understand the relative impact they can have on yield through those two strategies, through messaging and through aid, and to understand that you're not really going to be able to make all the changes you want to make without thinking about how your aid strategy is going to play into the picture there. So I think that certainly is a very, very much a constant. And then I think also the other constant that's true, and it relates to one of the first comments I made about the increasing focus on personalization, is that what students really want from institutions is for an institution to be able to say, to tell them what their individual personal value proposition is, right? So it's not about who the institution is and what the value of the institution is. It's, what is the value of your institution for me personally? The better you can do that, the better you're going to be able to yield students.
I think as the financial burden potentially of a secondary degree becomes more and more prevalent. I mean, news every day has at least 1 or 2 articles about debt and why millennials can't afford homes because of avocado toast. Read actually probably more like financial debt from school and stuff like that. It's something that I'm seeing increasingly in my own communities be a question of concern. Is, I love this school, it's the best fit, but it's not the best fit for my wallet. And that
Right.
that weighing
Yeah.
of, do I want to go to this perfect place and be in debt a really long time, or how does that work for me?
Right. And I think it's interesting because one of the things you can look at in the survey is the relative choice position of schools. And still, this is a very consistent number. You know, about 80% of all students say, I'm able to go to my first choice school. And that number stayed pretty consistent over the years, but I think it's a little bit of in there where students are convincing themselves their choice is their first choice, right? So because, you know, in sort of an after the fact fashion. And I still think that there are students who are probably choosing more institutions due to affordability, and that is actually elevating that school into a first choice position because it's being considered more of a value. So
Yep.
something to watch still.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, my decision to where I went to college 100% factored in, and that was
Hmm.
how it became my first choice was, oh,
Right.
here's
Exactly.
the package that I got. And yes, now it's my first choice because package A did way better than package B at school
Right.
Z. So that's something definitely to keep in mind. And we a little bit, the trade-offs is a really interesting aspect, I think, that you just touched on briefly. Were there any other interesting trade-offs that you saw people kind of making, or the data revealed to you, whether it is they really valued academics, so they kind of let maybe a
Sure.
less um, uh, integrated student life piece kind of go a little bit
Yeah.
further down on the list?
Well, we see trade-offs definitely, and I think the biggest place that you see trade-offs are with students who fall into this decision segment of saying affordability was the straw that broke the camel's back for me. You know, it's about, I want to say, 12% of students. You'll see the exact number in the survey, but if the question was basically if you had to choose one thing that put you over the top, it's about 12% of students that said it was the affordability. When you break those students out, they are trading off academic quality for affordability. That's clearly in the offing, and more so than any other group, they have those kinds of trade-offs. There are a couple of other interesting trade-offs. So if you have a look at, again, if we go back to the personas, if you have a look at students who are very experientially interested, so students who are thinking about having very hands-on experiences in college, who are going toward many articulated majors like health professions, they're so single-mindedly focused on getting those experiences that they say they don't care that much about some of the really important things of college, like the social experiences and the ability to do other things, you know, connect to campus and kind of the bigger picture pieces of college that people do come to value. So there are always trade-offs for each group, but I think again there are opportunities as students come into your institutions and begin to enroll, opportunities to understand where students are starting from and think about what are their strengths and how can we support them in their strengths, but then also what do we have to watch out for? What are the things we might have to work with our students to help them learn that if you do want to be a successful student, you have to kind of care about a number of different things. You can't just be a single-minded, single-focused type of student.
Definitely. And so jumping a little bit to, which is my favorite topic, I love social media.
Hmm.
It's always a hot topic, especially as new admission cycles are kind of starting up, ramping up, and travel and all of the different marketing is going out. What can we expect to learn from this survey from this year regarding social media? What are some of the big takeaways I can share with my team to get us thinking about creating content that resonates
Sure.
with these thoughtful and personalized audience segments that we should be thinking about?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think first of all, in terms of just tracking the overall usage of social media, which we've done consistently over the last 10 years or so, we're seeing the big trend of Instagram really becoming king in social media, displacing Facebook almost in a certain way. And you can look at that through both sort of usage and influence on actual decisions. So Facebook and Instagram are about equally used by about 40% of students in our survey sample said they used it in for college admissions information. But Instagram is seen as being far more influential in a decision to apply to an institution or enroll at an institution, right? What we also see is that Snapchat really is on the rise. Again, it's a little used platform. About 14% of students said that they had used Snapchat to learn about an institution over the course of their search. That's up from about 9% last time, so that's definitely a big increase. But what's interesting about Snapchat is that 69% of students, which was the highest number of any social media platform, said that Snapchat was influential in helping them decide to enroll. So what that means to me is, and I think this goes back to a sort of a consistent conversation we've had about social media in college search. Maybe Facebook and Instagram are most used because that's what our admissions counselors are most comfortable using. And there aren't a lot of opportunities to engage with Snapchat. That's one hypothesis, right? The other hypothesis, which is also bandied about there as well, maybe Snapchat is really a high school student's social space and they really don't want to engage in college search on Snapchat. I think probably both of those things are true to some extent, but I do think that there's a tremendous opportunity to be doing some different things in places like Snapchat. You should look at Facebook and Instagram as really those social media assets that are critical and important and kind of stalwarts. But you should think about how would you use something that's as highly engaging as Snapchat in a very targeted, segmented way to begin to some of this greater influence that you could have with students. And just as a anecdotally about that, I have two stepdaughters, one who's 16 and one who's 13. The 16-year-old has a Facebook account and an Instagram account and a Snapchat account, and the 13-year-old doesn't have a Facebook account and is on Snapchat pretty much 24 hours a day. So I just think as those students generationally change, you have to stay with where those students are, and Facebook is kind of falling by the wayside for a lot of students. And I know if you want more in-depth information about that, we partner with, Eduventures and NRCCUA partner with Ruffalo Nolevitz on our e-expectation study. That data is out there, which gives you much greater in-depth information about social media and all kinds of things, social and digital.
I love that data set, by the way. Anyone that, if you haven't checked it out, it's awesome. It's always on my download and share list every year as it rolls out. It's a great pulse check. And again, for me, it allows us to figure out where our resources should be allocated. I'm not sure if it was on purpose, but I didn't hear Twitter mentioned regarding prospective students. And so that's something that I'm seeing very interestingly on our side of things being a good place for us to listen and pay attention to our audiences, but kind of like that Snapchat dilemma. Right. Are they looking to engage with us? Are they trying to engage with us? Or is Twitter kind of a space for them to be peer-to-peer, or they don't want us listening into? So that I love that.
Well, I think Twitter's interesting, and I think you hit it right on the nail right on the head, that Twitter is important for monitoring the brand, essentially, and for responding to sort of things that are happening with the brand. Twitter, if you look into the e-expectations data, is much more about a much more important platform for parents than it is for students. So it's kind of out there, but it's not in the central assets that you have. Certainly not for students, but you obviously can't ignore it as well.
Absolutely. It's kind of one of those things where you see Facebook. Actually, one of the ways I explain Facebook to people is that it's kind of like email. You get to a certain age where you say, oh, you don't have a Facebook. It's kind of like someone saying, oh, can I email you? And you say, oh, I don't use email. And that
right.
It's just odd enough to have you stop and say, wait, you don't? How do you stay in touch with all of these people and friends and stuff like that? And my office mate actually deleted her Facebook account earlier this year and has found that it's interesting how many people relied on that to communicate with her. She's still off of it. She enjoys kind of that silence, but it's still interesting to think about in that way. We also have another Twitter question, and so this is back to talking about if first choices and how different things weigh into it. If a student convinces themselves that they've chosen their first choice school rather than an original first choice after doing research, can we call that a Marcom win, or it's kind of like a gray area philosophy type question?
I think it is a very deep philosophy question. In some ways, you can call it a Marcom win. I think it's both. I mean, you can't just give the win to Marcom, because the win is certainly partially Marcom, but often the win is on the financial aid side, right? And I think it goes down to the fact that by the time students get through their search, they've been through a long process. They've discussed it with their family, their friends, their guidance counselors, whoever is in their orbit of influencers, which certainly changes. By the time they get down to that last choice, they actually don't have a bad choice usually, right? If they're accepted to 2 or 3 institutions even, and most students are accepted to many more than 2 or 3 institutions, they've vetted those institutions and they're all going to be fine. And it's going to come down to those little things. And the little thing might be, affordability, which isn't little, but I mean, it's the decider could be affordability, but the decider could just as equally be, I walked on campus and it felt like home, right? So it's attention to the details at the last minute for what a student really cares about is critical. So that brings me back to one of my original points, is where if you're in your yield strategy, you have to really understand at an individual level what is on that student's mind, what are they critically looking at, and you have to bring them the information they need to make that decision on their terms, right?
And so this brings me to another kind of, I guess, philosophy type of question. But so I think the current attitude and trend for college applications is that we pick the students, and there's less realization on the prospective students' part, and I think actually probably in our favor, because we haven't quite figured out how we would handle it if they flipped the equation on us, that it's really the student picking the school and us kind of catering different things and making sure they're seeing the things that are of interest to them. Do you see that kind of increasingly coming to a head in the way college applications are run with this data and this personalization? And no longer is it a mass email that we then just get tons of info back because they don't know that they can explore all these other options.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think if you go way back to some of the original research in college search, you'd go back to technically the mathematicians would call this a stable marriages match. That's what it is, right? That's mathematically what it is. You have two sides, two parties who are sizing each other up and looking for fit. And I do think that in our, the current media environment, that students can be made to believe that they actually don't have a lot of say in the choice. The myth is that, oh, the colleges are really putting us through our paces, and we're at the mercy of college and universities, and they don't recognize actually that the colleges themselves are seeking that best fit. And it's for two reasons. I mean, certainly the market we're in is just dictating that we are in an era of improved fit. Colleges are no longer just chasing the brass ring of growing enrollments or improving quality. They're recognizing that in order to be viable and meaningful for the next 10, 15 years, they have to fundamentally find the right students for their institution and make those students successful. Right. So I think that's why there's a lot more attention to this recruiting for fit and finding the students who are going to work well in your institution, because that's only going to make things easier downstream when you talk about fully being successful throughout the student life cycle and providing real value for that very expensive dollar that families are paying for education.
Absolutely. I feel like a bobblehead because I'm just it's lining up to what I'm seeing contextually in our groups and this growing challenge of the best fit, and where I feel like we're more on audition or putting our best face forward and wanting to make sure that we're connecting them to the right resources and the right students that are already on campus and sending them the right information, because one slip up with how much information that they're getting can lose a prospective student that may have been a great fit for us. And I'm really interested to see how and when the application process changes and kind of flips it all on its head and the students really own the process.
Right.
I'm checking Twitter for any last questions. I think we've covered them all. And I think so, just a quick review, we've covered a lot of info. I think some of the key takeaways is that continued focus on best fit and personalization. And that's what the data this year is really, really going to reveal to us. And I think in future years, it's going to be the big review, just growing. Any other big takeaways that before we sign off for today that I could take back right to my admissions office right now and say, this is it. This is a new piece of info we need to focus on.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with your summary, and I think this just gets down to being able to work at a more granular level in yield strategies. I mean, if you go and you think about what colleges were doing 10 years ago in terms of yield, running some open houses and admitted student days, and some phone calls from students or faculty, the array of tools has gotten much more sophisticated, and I think actually schools have done a better job of that. But it has to continue, right? It's becoming much more granular And the deeper you can get down to an individual level and really target those students who are on the fence, who you know are good candidates, the better off your institution is going to be.
I know that I've had an absolute blast from hearing from you today, and I'm really excited for the survey, which is set to come out in the fall. And to access the survey, you'll need to register for a membership on, I'm blanking, it's the NR.
So we are, you'll think about it, if you're an NRCCUA client and you have the Encura Data Lab platform, you'll certainly see the highlights. There'll be a place where you can kind of check out some of the highlights of the survey. If you want the in-depth report, you'd have to be an Eduventures member, certainly. We'll have some wake-up calls that we're writing about the data and some other information like that as well.
Well, I'm really looking forward to the data. And that's our show for today. I'd like to thank Kim for joining us and spending her afternoon and sharing her wisdom with our audience. And a huge thanks to our program sponsors, as always, M. Stoner and our NRCCUA. And as always, thanks to you, my audience, for joining and asking great questions. This has been Admissions Live, and I'm Erin Spinka. Have a great week.
Thank you.